Hello and welcome to our presentation. Today we'll be talking about different development banks all across the world. This includes the IMF, World Bank, and the European Development Bank. To start off with, I want to note the difference between the IMF and the World Bank. For some people, it is very difficult to distinguish between the two, and we'll be talking about the difference in their purpose, their structure, where they receive funding from, how they assist different categories of members, how they have different methods. But in principle, the World Bank is a development bank, and the IMF is a cooperative institution that seeks to maintain an orderly system of payments and receipts between the nations. Now, development institution or development bank is very easy to understand, but the IMF's official description and definition is quite hard. This basically means they are there to act as a third party to ensure people uphold their monetary agreements. Now, you may ask what use of this is to the world, and I'm about to show you. Welcome, Mr. President. I hope you have the money. Of course. Here's your money. I hope you have your side of the trade agreement. Pretty good. Here is yours. Aww, so cute. This is the best trade deal in the history of trade deals. I am very happy with this business. Well, I have to go now before things go wrong. See you later. I hope we can make many more trade agreements. Let's see, my $2 million. Screw you, you American scum! I just thought that was a clip of the United States and North Korea starting atomic warfare. And it's quite an over-exaggeration. Well, maybe not with Trump and Kim Jong-un in power, but we have 2 months to see what happens. And hopefully you found it funny. But, in fact, this proves the need for a third-party system. Because before the UN, the world was waging war with each other constantly. Allies, treaties, enemies were constantly changing hands and changing partnerships. There was no trust among countries, and for that reason, people were scared of making trade agreements. In an era of globalization, having trust is very important, and there is where the IMF comes to power. And to know more about this, Isha will be taking over.
Now I'm going to discuss about the International Monetary Fund, its history, its role, its objectives. First, basically, I'm going to talk about the history of International Monetary Fund. The establishment of International Monetary Fund is a great landmark in the history of international monetary cooperation. After the First World War, commercial rivalry rose among the major countries of the world. Some of the major countries of the world tried to return to the gold standard. Thus, under gold standard, these countries wanted to maximize their exports and minimize their imports. To achieve these objectives, several countries of the world resorted for devaluation of the currency. To the close of the Second World War, dire need was felt for the establishment of the monetary institution. The British put forward a plan called the Keynes Plan, while the USA put forward a plan named the White Plan. An international conference was held at Bretton Woods in July 1944. Representatives of 44 countries participated in the conference. As a result, International Monetary Fund came into existence on December 1945 with the objective of promoting international economic stability by promoting the balanced growth of member countries.
Discuss about the achievements of IMF. The major achievements are establishment of a monetary reserve fund, monetary discipline and cooperation, check on competitive currency devaluation, technical assistance to member countries, no interference in the domestic affairs, special interest in the problems of the underdeveloped countries, Reconstruction of European countries means that on account of the efforts of the fund, rich countries like America gave economic assistance under Marshall Plan for the reconstruction of the European countries. But for this plan, war-devastated European countries could have not been rehabilitated. Secondly, stability in the foreign exchange rate, special interest in the problems of the underdeveloped countries. These were the major achievements of IMF. We are going to discuss about the structure of International Monetary Fund. To achieve its objectives, International Monetary Fund has a code of economic behavior for its members. It makes financing available to members in balance of payments, difficulties, and provides them with technical assistance to improve their economic management. The International Monetary Fund has member countries accounting for about 4/5 of the total world population and 90% of the world trade. The first structure we are going to discuss about is the pool of financial resources. The fund maintains a large pool of financial resources. These are made available temporarily and subject to conditions to the member countries to enable them to carry out the program and to provide the remedy to their payment deficit without resorting to the restrictive measures that would adversely affect national and international prosperity. The structure that we are going to discuss about is the regular consultation. To enable the fund to carry out its policies, member countries continuously support a broad range of economic and financial information, and the fund consults regularly with each member countries on its economic situation. That we are going to discuss about is the special borrowing rights. The fund is particularly concerned with the global liquidity, that is, the level and composition of the reserves that members here available for meeting the trade, and National Monetary Fund was established to overcome all trade restrictions and impediments and further to promote multinational trade. Thus, the fund is most deliberate attempt to organize the conduct of international monetary affairs.
Well, to really understand the World Bank, let's go back into history, to the ending years of World War II and the creation of the United Nations. In July 1944, representatives from 44 nations met at Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, for the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference. And from there, the World Bank and IMF were created, but you already know all of this. The World Bank's first act was helping France reconstruct after the bombings in France and the destruction of France. Although they left focus on Europe quickly, because the US was far richer and deployed the Marshall Aid, which was more helpful than the World Bank could ever do, as it is still in its fetal stages. So it changed its focus to Asia, Africa, and South America. In the 1950s and 60s, the funding of large infrastructure projects such as dams, electrical grids, irrigation systems, and roads was the bank's primary focus. So moving on to the structure of the World Bank. Each of the bank's more than 100 member states are represented on the board of directors, which meets once a year. The governors are usually their country's finance ministers or central bank governors. Although the board of governors have very little power in policy making, actual decisions are made by the 25 executive directors. 5 major countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Japan, appoint their own executive directors. The other countries are grouped into regions and get one executive director each. Voting power is based on a country's capital subscription, which is based in turn on its economic resources. The wealthier and more developed countries constitute the bank's major shareholders, thus have more executive powers. For example, in the early 21st century, the United States accounted for 1/6 of the votes in the IBRD, more than double of that of Japan, the second largest contributor. Because developing countries hold only a small number of votes, the system does not provide a significant voice for those countries, which are the main recipients of the loans and policy advice. So now let's look at the internal structures of the World Bank Group. there are 5 parts of the World Bank Group, all responsible for different things. Let's start off with the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development, or the IBRD. It was established in 1945 as the first sector in the World Bank Group. Its role was to promote institutional, legal, and regulatory reform. The members of this group are member states with per capita income between $1,000 and $6,000. They provide technical assistance, loans, and policy advice. The International Development Association, or the IDA, was established in 1960, having the same role. Although they differed in the member states that were allowed to join the group. Here, the member states were only allowed to have a less than $1,000 per capita income. They provide this technical assistance, interest-free loans, and policy advice. The difference being, of course, interest-free loans. The National Finance Cooperation, or the IFC, was established in 1957, and its role was to promote private sector development. Its member states of the group being large private companies in the member states, and it provided long-term loans, equity or quasi-equity, risk management and advisory services. Multilateral Investment and Guarantee Agency, or the MIGA, was established in 1988. Its role was to provide instruments for political investment and risk management. The members of this being foreign investors, and them providing political risk management. And lastly, International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes. Established in 1966, its role was to provide facilities of consultations and arbitration of international investment disputes, so such as a law type of system. The members being foreign investors, again, and the disputed settlement facilities. Well, the mission statement of the World Bank is to end poverty, and this can be seen through the 5 sectors, with providing loans, aid, and advising in policies. Now, the World Bank has done some good and bad in the world, and I wanted to look at each of these. One of the highlights of the World Bank has there been structural adjustment programs. The programs were based on the concept that privatization, domestic deregulations on trade, macroeconomics, and the labor market will eventually bring about social gains. Some good examples of these and the validity of the rationale behind the SAP schemes were provided by the countries in the East Asian Miracle. These being Taiwan, Hong Kong, Korea, and Singapore, which due to the liberalization of their economies experienced an unexperienced economic boom, becoming richer than many of their former colonial powers. But on the other hand, we can see Zambia, a country which after getting independence in 1964 had a relatively healthy domestic economy based on their export of copper and production of metal. Including the 1973 standby agreement with the IMF, Zambia benefited from loans from international actors such as the British government or the World Bank. The liberalization of Zambia's economy had led to a dramatic increase in debt, and Zambia failed in 1987 to secure a new agreement with the IMF. So now, why is the World Bank so controversial, and why do people say it is useless? Well, as you saw the case of Zambia, and as I previously talked about, there is inherently problems with the structure of the World Bank, such as the control over the policies and the World Bank. The World Bank is supposed to benefit the poor countries, but in these cases, it is controlled by US, UK, France, who aren't poor countries. The rich control and decide what they think is most beneficial for the poor. This can lead to inadequate research and other problems and other complications. Another very important factor to consider is how the World Bank functions. Its main aid is loans, and it lacks follow-up and commitment. This is another problem with the IMF too. Here, the World Bank will give a loan to a developing country and say, do what you want with it. Without the proper experience or the proper tools, they're unable to use that money in any proper way, which leads the money to be wasted and the World Bank to lose faith. After talking about the World Bank and the IMF, I want to show you what effects they can actually have in regional development. And this can be seen in Poland with the WKD. Wait, what am I doing? Let me just show you. So let's look at the Swiss aid. This aid was started in 2013 and it was given to Eastern European countries to bridge the gap between the Eastern European economies and the Western European economies. This is not only for public transport, but for all other facilities a country must have for development, such as medical aid, other infrastructure, economic balancing, buying goods, and setting up trade agreements. We see this as an example of economic development through aid, and it was done to the Swiss aid project. But there are many other projects in Europe and many other banks, and we'll be looking at that next. This isn't the only program European states have when it comes to development. The European Investment Bank is the leading arm of the European Union. They are the biggest multinational financial institute in the world and one of the largest providers of climate finance. The European Investment Bank was founded in Brussels in 1958, when the Treaty of Rome was signed. At the time, the bank only had 66 employees. In 1968, the bank relocated to Luxembourg. The EIB group was formed in the 2000s and was composed of the EIB and the European Investment Fund, the EU's venture capital organization that provides finance and provides guarantee for SMEs. The EIB is the EIF's majority shareholder and holds 62% of their shares. In 2012, the EIB Institute was created to promote European initiatives in EU member states. The EIB is an EU entity and a bank. Therefore, it must adhere to both public and corporate governance principles. The Institute has 3 decision-making bodies: the Board of Governors, the Board of Directors, and Management Committee. The Board of Governors set the direction of the EIB. The Board of Directors oversee the strategic direction of management, and the Management Committee supervises the daily operations in the EIB. The bank has 28 shareholders who are member states of the EU. Dr. Werner Hoyer is the current president and holds that position of director and chairman since January 1st, 2012. The mission and the vision of the EIB can be seen through their climate roadmap, where they promise to support $1 trillion in investment for climate action and environmental sustainability in the decade up to 2030. EIB Group is now aligning all financial activities from end of 2020 with the goals of the Paris Agreement. More than 50% of the annual financing dedicated to green investment by 2025, more green advisory services and financing of innovative low-carbon technologies, and finally the support for green capital markets and climate change adaptations with transition projects. All of these can show us that the EIB currently is heading for a greener world and a greener society. Its main goal is to focus on the climate crisis we have currently on our Earth. And lastly, their role in international relations. And that is simply to support the EU's policies in every way possible they can. Currently, they're looking at climate change as their avenue. That is all. Today we have focused on the EIB, the World Bank, and the IMF. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, please be free to message me on Facebook, WhatsApp, or by email. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed.